Hey guys, have you ever wondered how the pros get that extra power on the serve, like 150 mile per hour serve? Well, we're going to dive into some interesting biomechanics by analyzing Mensik, Perricard, the big server, and also comparing to Qinwen, who's a top female server, just to compare different styles of power positions and how some players are lagging in the serve technique to get extra MPH on their serve. So I think you'll enjoy. Try to hang in there with me. Some of the details are a little bit in the weeds biomechanically, but I hope to also try to explain things in layman's terms so everybody can benefit from some of these new techniques that the pros are using. All right, stay tuned. So guys, I just wanted to look at Mensik briefly and then Perricard, who are two of the biggest servers on tour. And I want to talk about a phenomenon that I call lag or delayed or dynamic trophy position. I think it helps to understand you have like you can put the racket right up into the classic trophy position, or you can sort of lag the racket, for lack of a better term. It's not quite the same as what happens on the forehand lag, but it's this idea of delaying the classic trophy position. So here we see with Mensik, the idea is when the legs are loaded, the racket's still low and the tip is still more or less down, the elbow's down. I can describe this anatomically, or we can just focus on the tip. Sometimes I think if you don't have a good grasp of the anatomy or the biomechanics, it's better just to focus on where like the tip of the racket is. So here's a good example. The left arm's up. Trying to think about the best way to describe this to regular people who don't study biomechanics. The left arm is up and the right arm is, and the racket's kind of like that, versus the classic trophy position. The racket will be up in concert, like in along with the left arm. So I'll show you a couple more examples of that. But that's what you could call that lag. Some people call that lag. Some people call that delay. I was thinking about call it delayed trophy position. I was also thinking about a dynamic trophy position is a good way to describe it, because the racket comes up dynamically through this power position here. Mensik, it's a good example right there. So the racket comes up, the racket's delayed. And then as he's exploding from the legs, the racket comes up and into the back scratch dynamically. So rather than just being frozen here, stopping here, which is the classic power position that a lot of players do, right? Mensik's going to bring the racket up dynamically through the trophy position, so a dynamic trophy. And the idea is that, if you get into the anatomy and physiology, you get into the biomechanics, it's going to increase the angular velocity of the humerus through an additional 90 degrees of rotation. So you get more rotation of the humerus, more rotation in the shoulder joint, and you can build up more velocity in the shoulder joint, which adds to a greater, basically, stretch reflex. You can get more elastic energy because you can create more of a forceful back scratch. So that's the idea behind this lag concept, or this delayed racket position concept. You see Sinner using this concept. You see Djokovic change his serve to use this lag. Many players throughout history have had this type of delay, but there's different styles of the delay, which makes it a little more complicated, but essentially a delay, and then more of a dynamic trophy position. And sometimes that's called the cocking phase. You go from loading to cocking, and you have a dynamic movement from loading to cocking that's happening in the shoulder joint. Federer was a very famous trophy server. Nadal, Djokovic, Sampras, Roddick are examples of players who had more of a delay and more of a dynamic trophy serve. Mensik shows here is dynamic, has a delay, has a lag. Perricard, I'm going to show you in a minute, has like a super lag, and he has a style that I call Cobra, where the wrist is flexed in the loading phase. This is the kick serve by Mensik. One thing I wanted to point out, just with all the servers we're going to study, is look how the left arm's tucked in. He's very sideways. That's a good indicator that the body's sideways. You have this great shoulder over shoulder, right shoulder high, left shoulder low, and you have the eyes pointing straight up. Great head position. And then watch what happens at the end. After impact, have this incredible internal shoulder rotation. This is like max internal shoulder rotation. Look at the range of motion that he has here. It's just beautiful. Not many of you folks probably will be able to get into that position. That is awesome at the end. So that's your internal shoulder rotation. And at the beginning, you also have this both, you see the leg here and the arm extending backwards like a counterweight, counter effect. But you have the internal shoulder rotation here. Then you're going to work on dynamically moving into max external shoulder rotation, which is more or less here. And then finishing with incredible internal shoulder rotation. That's the movement of the shoulder joint, the glenohumeral joint. That's the action that we're sort of analyzing to try to get more power. All right, let's look at Perricard. I have some more Mensik. You can kind of compare, but Perricard is my favorite example of Cobra. Cobra means the wrist is flexed and the racket tips more or less pointing down. I've been working on this with a lot of my players. It's a new thing that I'm working on that I think is really exciting. So the racket tip's pointing down, but it's the same idea as with Mensik. The left arm's pointing up, the racket tip's pointing down, and you have this differential happening. In other words, you don't want to have both racket and arm up, like a classic trophy position would be here. A lot of players get in this position. They get here and here. You want to have this delay or lag or whatever you want to call it. Some of what I'm talking about is based on an analysis by James Shaughnessy, so I recommend you look up his work. He's a PhD biomechanist and tennis coach, James Shaughnessy, not to be confused with Craig O'Shaughnessy. James Shaughnessy. Okay, so here's the delay. And then so you're going to dynamically come up into this position. So this is the classic trophy position, but you're not going to freeze here or slow down here. And what Shaughnessy argues is that if you do that, you lose, you basically lose some of the stretch shortening cycle elastic energy potential. And what he argues is that by having this delay, you can rapidly stretch the internal shoulder rotators. Internal shoulder rotators are very powerful. There's a number of them as compared to the external shoulder rotators. The internal shoulder rotators are subscapularis, teres major, pectoralis majors involved, possibly deltoids involved with internal shoulder rotation. So you just have a number of muscles contributing to a powerful internal shoulder rotation. That's one of the reasons why forehands are more powerful than backhands typically, or one-handed backhands, that the internal shoulder rotators are a primary force in the human body. So they help you accelerate. The external shoulder rotators, typically described as teres minor and infraspinatus, they are just not as powerful. They're not as big or strong muscles, so they don't move the racket as fast. So when you can put these internal shoulder rotators on stretch, it's like a really big deal. It can give you a lot more power on the serve. So that's the concept behind this lag or this delay. You're going to put those muscles by accelerating upward here and getting a dynamic trophy, going right into there, You're going to put those, this is a max point of external rotation, external shoulder rotation. You're going to put those muscles on more stretch. What Shaughnessy says is that if you have a rapid enough stretch and a large enough range of motion, the spindle embedded in the internal rotator muscles triggers an automatic reflex action that has been proven to create more force. So that's sort of the scientific basis here for the hypothesis. Shaughnessy says that trophy-style servers stop or slow down at the end of the loading stage and or the beginning of the cocking stage. So they don't build up as much angular velocity to stretch the internal shoulder rotator muscles. So Shaughnessy argues that that's less efficient. He says it's more efficient to have this delay or this lag, so you can build up a more forceful back scratch, essentially, putting the internal shoulder rotator muscles on more stretch. So it's a really good hypothesis. I just think we need more evidence to definitively prove it. But if you're a coach out there or a player, you could definitely experiment with this delayed action. You've seen a lot of pros using this style. Herkatz is another one that comes to mind. It's got a really good delay, really good lag. Many pros do this. And it's a reasonable hypothesis that this can add power by stretching the internal shoulder rotators a little bit more forcefully and through a greater range of motion. That's going to give you a better elastic energy return. Got a couple more angles of Perricard here. Here's the lag. Look how the tip is pointing down. The left arm is up, tip of the racket pointing down. So you want to look for those opposites. And then you're looking for the dynamic trophy here. So this is not a static trophy position. This is dynamic. This is slow motion. So don't misunderstand. Like, he's not stopping here. He's going fast through here to generate a more forceful stretch of the internal rotators. Look at this nice explosion. I always try to point this out to you guys. Look at this nice straight line here, eyes up, high impact point, stretching the body, and then a big explosion. He's about a foot into the court here. And then that nice split landing position. You have these angles here with the body leaning forward 45 degrees or more or less. You have the hip extension in the right. This is the hip extension back. You have the post of the left leg, hip extension back of the right leg, and then you have this forward lean that's typical of good pro servers when they just post impact. Slow motion of the lag again. Ball's up, left arm's up. Where's the racket? Racket is down, racket is delayed, racket's lagged, whatever term you want to use. Dynamic trophy adds extra stretch to the internal shoulder rotators. A pretty good hypothesis. If you try to work on this, you can juice up a little more power in your serve. Here's a great angle of it. This is perfect shot of it. This is Cobra lag. You could call it Cobra lag. Racket is down. Left arm's up. This is the separation that you want. Left arm up, racket tip down. You get into the sort of the anatomy and the physiology and the biomechanics. Shaughnessy talks about the medial epicondyle, which is the inside of the elbow. It's like a bony bump on the inside of the elbow, and it points down. So Shaughnessy talks about that. This is James Shaughnessy, not Craig O'Shaughnessy. That position is key for Shaughnessy because it allows the dynamic movement of the arm up into the trophy position and then down into the back scratch. So dynamic movement through the trophy position, not a static trophy. So right now the shoulder joint can build up more angular velocity. The humerus can move faster by having this extra range of motion through here, continuing down into the max point of shoulder external rotation. as opposed to starting from there, you're starting from here, so you get this extra room basically to accelerate the shoulder joint, moving from internal rotation here to max external rotation during the back scratch. That beautiful extension. This is the position that I work on with all my players, just post-impact. You want to see this, as I mentioned again, this beautiful split. Split here, trunk angled forward. If you're not seeing that, something's wrong in the loading, toss, or impact. You have this high kick. This is very common now on tour. High kick of the back leg. It's a counterweight. So that's Cobra lag, and the Cobra lag has the additional wrist flexion that can point the tip down. You can also focus on pointing the strings down. So the wrist is flexed here, causing the racket tip down. You can also, another cue can be the strings down to the ground. You'll see with Mensik, we have Mensik coming up here. Here's the tip down. The wrist is flexed. The strings here are not pointing straight down, but the tip is down. So in terms of the delayed styles, some people use the Cobra style where the wrist is flexed. Some people have a neutral wrist like Mensik, I'll show you in a second, has a neutral wrist and the wrist is not flexed. But in any event, the racket is delayed. So there's different ways to delay it. You can delay it with more of a tip down action, which I call Cobra lag. You can lag the racket with more of a neutral wrist. Let's look at Mensik, he does that. Here's a big serve from Mensik. So here's his delay or his lag. Delay, 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 delay. But notice that he has more of a longer windup and the racket tip is out to the side like this. So he's not pointing the tip down. He's not flexing the wrist. His wrist is very neutral here. If you look carefully, the wrist is pretty neutral. But he's still getting a lot of the same benefits, I think, as Perricard, and the same benefits that Shaughnessy is talking about, where the racket, as you watch it come up here, you see he's in this position with the medial epicondyle, the elbows pointing, inside of the elbows pointing down. So he's going to get all this range. He's going to be able to dynamically accelerate the racket into the back scratch and then up into the impact. And so Shaughnessy is saying that that's very important for adding racket speed. In a lot of Mark Kovacs's research and studies, he doesn't emphasize this as much. This is something that Shaughnessy thinks is really important to adding a little extra juice to the serve. So the shoulder, if you can look at where the shoulder has an extra 90 degrees of room to externally rotate. So you're going to go from here, boom, down to there, rather than starting from, let's say, here and just going down to there. So there's less range of motion to accelerate and to forcefully stretch the internal shoulder rotators from that classic style. But Shaughnessy is really big in this. Kovacs tends to argue, or has historically argued, that it doesn't really matter what happens during the beginning phase of the serve as long as you get into a good loaded position. So he doesn't really emphasize this particular technique, but I mean, he may be evolving and moving there as we get more research on this. But I think this hypothesis is a very good one by Shaughnessy. So you're going to look at the shoulder. The shoulder's internally rotated here, and it's going to go up to the classic trophy position, then down into the deep back scratch, which is the max shoulder external rotation, as fast as possible. You want to get that as forceful as possible. And the concept is that you can get a more forceful back scratch, a more forceful stretch of the internal shoulder rotators through a dynamic movement through here, dynamically going through here. So dynamically moving into the back stretch right there. I'll show you a couple more details here. Okay, we're going have the delay here. So it's a little bit different than Perricard because the racket is off to the side, but the hand is low, the racket is low. Try to focus in on that, the position of the hand, the position of the racket and the delay. And then you get this nice build up, look how he dynamically comes up through the power position or through the trophy position. So rather than being stuck in the trophy position right here, he's gonna come from way down here. It's a lot like Sinner, from like way down here, all the way up, and then down to the deep back scratch, dynamically building up at max velocity, angular velocity in the shoulder, right there. So that's the delay concept. That's the lag concept that you can try to work on to add more power to your serve. I'll show you. Here's that beautiful stretch that I'm trying to emphasize this as a important component of all serves. This stretch, straight body, and then these guys flying in the air, way off the ground, and making this big split. This is typical now. Split position, body leaning forward, but the body way off the ground with a huge explosion. Let's look quickly at Qinwen because she has a different style. This is the classic trophy. It's still a beautiful serve. Look at this. But as the legs are loading, look where the racket is. It's already vertical. So Shaughnessy would argue that this doesn't give you as much angular velocity of the humerus, doesn't give you as much of a forceful stretch of the internal shoulder rotators. He would like to see her racket here or racket here. There's a lot of different ways to delay, a lot of different ways to lag here, but you wouldn't want the racket here. If you believe in this hypothesis, if you believe that you can get a little extra juice from the delay, you wouldn't want to be right up in the power classic. Look, both arms are up. The racket tip and the arm are up. You want the racket somewhere, you want a differential. You want the racket down here, here, anywhere. The racket can be, so different ways to do it. You can salute here. The racket can be here like erotic. You can be like a Hurkacz over here or a Perricard over here. You can be like a Sinner or Sampras with the racket low here, So as long as if the racket's anywhere delayed, you're going to get more of this forceful stretch of the internal shoulder rotators, according to this hypothesis at least. And I think it could definitely, if it's true, it could definitely add a couple miles per hour to your serve. Here in this classic position, the idea is going from here down to the back scratch. It's just not as forceful. And it kind of makes sense if you think about it, just logically. It's not as forceful of a racket drop as if you came from like down here and went all the way up and over and down. You're going to get more acceleration that way. So that's the concept, guys. What do you think? Do you prefer the classic trophy like this? Or do you like the concept of the dynamic trophy? Do you like this idea of lagging the racket? Do you buy into this? Do you think that by getting this delay, you can get more stretch of the internal shoulder rotators, you can get more power? Do you think this is a future trend that we'll see more on the tour? Should we be teaching this to young juniors? And in addition, are there some delay styles that are better than others? For example, is it better to do the Cobra style like Perricard, or is it better to do the Mensik style, which is a little more neutral wrist position, or perhaps the salute position, like the Roddick style? These are more areas to be explored, but I think there's good logic behind this concept of delaying the racket and trying to get a little more forceful back scratch to try to get a little more elastic energy into the serve. Let me know what you think. Drop a comment, and I'd be happy to talk about it in the comment section. And this is a very interesting aspect of modern serving that not a lot of people are talking about.